This podcast is made possible by DistroKid, the new standard in digital music distribution. DistroKid is the best way to get your music in Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, and more. Even TikTok. Ask your kids. Learn more at distrokid.com.
Hey, it's Larry Crane. Welcome to the Tape Op Podcast. What started as a solo endeavor from band founder and frontman Ryan Lott, Son Lux has blossomed into a collaborative effort with the addition of band members Chang and Rafiq Bhatia. Their new release, Tomorrow, seeks to defy the confines of the traditional album release, instead choosing to put out the music in 3 collections over a span of time. Ryan caught up with online publisher Geoff Stanfield to discuss his process, collaboration, film scoring, and making music during a global pandemic. Enjoy.
Despite the plans we make, some will walk, some will run, but as we go, we lose everyone.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I do want to talk about your new record and your recording process, but before that, I mean, I'd love to know, how did you get the bug for recording and becoming interested in that aspect of it, in addition to, writing music and performing?
Yeah, man. We basically, it was when we were in college. When I was in college, I was in a band that was really active, and we were really serious about it. And we had recorded an album, working in the sort of the sound department at the school. This was at Indiana University, the recording department. And, dude just kind of like did us a favor engineering it and mixing it. And it took forever. And it was like, weirdly, it like wound up being expensive, even though everything was supposed to be free. And it was just kind of like, but at the same time, it was absolutely thrilling to have a record, so, definitely got the bug at that point of like having this artifact of your creative work that was like undeniable. This is physical. Back then it was a CD, this physical CD, and the process, but the process of recording it felt so, felt so clinical, and when it came time to do another project with the band, I was like, yo, we got to figure out how to do this ourselves. And we did the craziest stuff, man. We recorded to multiple like devices at the same time, which caused like all kinds of drift problems. Like we used like the audio input of like a PC, a DAT machine, and like a couple other like random like handheld devices or something like that, all at once to like track like 6 channels of drums.
Oh my God.
So you pull all that in, and like, we didn't know anything. So it was like, oh yeah, we'll just like line up. We'll just line it up, and then you press play, and then like 20 seconds later, you're like, why is everything flamming? And then it's like, whoa, this is crazy. So, we did stuff like that, but we made it work, and it was like, we got, I personally, and basically I was at the helm of making it happen. And I was the synth guy. So I was already kind of like, the guy who was like plugged in and, recording his stuff direct. And, and basically I wound up assembling this whole thing and making it work. And as cumbersome and as absurd as the process was, I was like completely loved it. And I felt right away that there was a symbiosis between creating and recording, that they were the same thing, as opposed to in the past where, whether it was high school bands or that first experience I had with this band in college, it felt like it was so decoupled from those two were so decoupled. There was the creating and the performing, and and then there was the recording, and there was an it was always an unhappy marriage,
Right.
But suddenly I was at the helm of this very humble project, but could sense how powerful the results could be when those two things came into alignment. And then basically from there it was like, and then I was just sampling CDs, and then I was beginning to like kind of attack music from the electron in the kind of direct in the digital realm, like direct sampling from CDs, back when like OS 9 could like you could snag like tiny little pieces of CD of like a track from a CDR through like an OS like utility. My sampling was always in the digital realm like that. Almost never like from a turntable needle or a tape deck or anything like that.
Right. And what platforms were you working in?
Oh man, so I'm such a weirdo. So the only DAW I use is Digital Performer.
It's still to this day.
Still.
Yeah, a lot of people do. You'd
And
be
it
surprised.
is so powerful and amazing. Recently, they've changed their infrastructure to make it even more powerful in some ways, but it actually is kind of crippling to my workflow. And so I'm exploring other options. In fact, I was just like emailing with UAD today about like some of the capabilities of Luna and restrictions that they're, like for example, with Luna, the UAD's like new DAW.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's really amazing. One of the profound limitations though for me of the software is that you can't host video, so you can't use it to score to picture, and that's kind of like my bread and butter. So I won't be able to get too deep until they add that capability.
You know who's a big digital performer user is Juana Molina.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I remember hearing that. I remember hearing that at one point. I forgot about that. I mean, man, it is an amazing tool for scoring, especially because you can. I won't bore you with DP, like totally irrelevant DP knowledge, but there's something called chunks, and you can. It's like having multiple sequences open in the same project, in the same session. You can have like totally unrelated, what's called chunks, and each chunk is its own sequence, its own mix window, its own everything. And basically you can, when you're scoring a film, a lot of times you're using multiple versions of the same, you're using like slightly different versions of the same kind of segment of music, like reusing cues over and over again, but kind of like adapting them each time. And what's fascinating about chunks is you can have like all the different iterations like right there before you. You can even open them up together at the same time and cut and paste audio and MIDI between chunks, like something you wouldn't be able to do in any other DAW.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it makes the workflow for scoring like it's really elegant. I also think that there's something to be said about the connection between our visual input and our audio output. If basically everyone is looking at the same 2 or 3 graphic user interfaces while making audio, it has to have a conforming effect, right? It's like if everyone is writing a poem, if everyone out there writing a poem is, while they're doing it, is looking at the Mona Lisa, let alone something as heinous as like a Pro Tools interface, like let's even call it something beautiful like the Mona Lisa, it's gonna be conforming. It's not the same art form. One's visual, one's text, but it's got to have a conforming effect. So part of me is kind of like, there's like a rebellion, there's a rebellious spirit in me that like really wants to like be in DP because no one else is.
Just to kind of further that concept, I just was like going through the archives for Tape Op, and I came across this article by Oz Fritz, and it was this thing about, this incredible new piece of outboard, hardware that I use on every session. But what he's talking about is using art as an influencer in the studio, and that's immediately what you just said made me think of.
I need that. I need that so hard right now.
Well, you kind of touched on it. You're already doing it a little bit by just talking about the influence of the visual on music. And
yeah, but I also kind of need to practice what I preach, because right now I'm in a sort of displaced studio situation. I mean, I'm renting an office, and it's well positioned in the building, and it's workable from an audio standpoint, from a kind of like logistical standpoint for me. I have 24/7 access. It's a safe place for gear, but it's the like just it's just like a heinous rented office suite that just feels completely like 1984 like corporate like office, you know what I mean? It's just like, and I just like I desperately need to like figure out a way to make my visual environment feel more inspiring. My bandmate Rafiq sent me he was like sensing my pain, and he's like he sent me a little surprise gift in the mail, and it was this incredible candle that smells absolutely amazing. And he's like, if your visual environment sucks, then like let's just at least make sure that there's this like flickering light and this beautiful scent that's like, permeating your space. And it makes a difference whenever I'm working on like really stuff that's really close to home for me, like spiritually. Basically this Son Lux stuff, when I'm working on it, I light that candle, and it's like, it's part of the ethos of creating and recording.
It is a massively overlooked part of creating, and I think whether you're a painter or a recording artist or an engineer or a film scorer or a gardener or whatever, I think that all of those things influence the way that you sort of interpret and output art. It's impossible not to, because we're human beings, and we're affected by so many different, we have all these senses. So if it's too hot, it's going to do one thing. I mean,
yeah. And we're acclimated to giving primacy to certain senses, when really, our physiology isn't, our brains will adapt to that insistence, but our physiology, our senses are always all open.
Yeah.
I just need to practice what I preach.
You thought we were going to talk about microphones, didn't you? My point being is, like, I don't really want to talk about the saw that I use, but I love having a great saw. The industry has evolved into this massive sort of plug-in DAW, like all the tools are accessible. GarageBand comes with 1 billion loops. It's on every single laptop. So you've got, and I'm not taking anything away from a lot of these pop records. There's some really great pop music coming out right now, but pretty much, I mean, if there's been such a crazy homogenization of the music.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there's, on the one hand, the landscape is broader than it ever has been, but there is a curious value given to conformity in pop music that I think it goes in. I think it goes in waves, but there's such a desire to make sure that your stuff sounds like everyone else's stuff. At least that seems like the impression based on sort of the pop landscape. This and it's bolstered, as you said, by like, oh, do you have the latest plugin from blah blah blah, that everyone else is using, or the latest sample pack from Splice that is like the go-to sample pack for the sound of now or whatever. And I understand these, like, software developers and companies need to, like, there's a marketing advantage to thinking like that, but it preys on this bias to conform, and as if sameness was like a good litmus test for quality. And it sounds kind of pious to say it, I guess, but I've always kind of valued the opposite, which is like, how can I make something absolutely intriguing and wonderful and satisfying in a way that's still feels like quote unquote home for people, that has a familiarity to it, that has like an approachable, like warm embrace quality, but at the same time is completely unlike anything you've heard before, or enough unlike anything you've heard before that you still feel like you're on this wonderful adventure in a foreign land, you know.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the new Son Lux record, which is called Tomorrows. And there's a couple questions that, I wanted to talk about how you made the record and how you collaborated. But I thought because you started out that project as a solo project for yourself, and you released at least several records as under that moniker, but they were you. And then Ian and Rafiq joined the band, and so I was kind of curious, like, for you, somebody that's done everything in the past, how do you start to collaborate effectively? How does that feel? And and what was the process of making this new record? Because to me, it sounds like there's so much of your film scoring that has been integrated into this, and it feels like it's straddling that line. And this is just my opinion, of course, but it straddles that line between something that's more cinematic. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, for sure. There's a kind of like, oh, that sounds like a film cue, or that sounds like we've gone into like some sci-fi movie, or we've gone into some like dystopian, emotive drama.
The record has so much more space than I feel like some of your previous releases.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely one of our goals, and that's part of the reason why we chose a multi-volume format. So technically, the album is not called Tomorrows; it's called Tomorrows Volume 1, because it's the first of a 3-volume record. We felt we had a growing feeling as the material was developing for this project that the album format was going to fail us, that we were growing out of it.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, I mean, the question started to emerge: is Son Lux a band that makes songs only? And then the natural extension of that is Son Lux a band that just makes albums full of songs? And we're kind of feeling like, no, like we're something else. And we don't have to stop doing that, but we certainly don't have to think of ourselves with holding this sacred format sacred. I mean, it is a sacred format, but do we have to be so sacrosanct about it?
Well, what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is how about we generate a season of work, and we let that work evolve organically based on our cumulative urges, the catalytic, the chemical reactions of our ideas together, and the inertia of our lives, create a body of work that doesn't necessarily conform to something that's between 35 and 50 minutes. And then we go out on the road and play those songs for a year and a half, and then come back and do it again. There's nothing wrong with that, and we've done that, and that is a way to do it. But as our urgings to liberate ourselves from that slammed up against a global pandemic that forbade a regular tour cycle in the near future, it felt like kismet. It felt like this was the universe, saying, or at least the untamed forces of the things that we could not control were actually aligning with this concept that we were starting to develop, which was a multi-volume release of this body of work. So the way that it came about is one of my practices, generally speaking, is when I get to the end of a long project, I give myself, rather than take a break, basically, I give myself the freedom to create without the bonds of deadline, purpose, or client input, or outside direction, right? It's just let me make whatever the hell I want to make, and for as long as I can sustain that. And specifically, what I love the most probably is starting. I love starting an idea. So what would be the most liberating and sort of like rewarding experience to give myself for having trudged through the lethargy of completing a project? And it's always that's always the hardest part of a project, is just like getting that thing done. It's like the mixing, and like it's like all the fixing and the mixing and the mastering and the artwork and the press and all, like this whole, like there's like this whole big machine kind of that starts to creep in around the art making. But your art making urges aren't stopping. So you also have to like subdue those new creative urges that belong to what is next in order to preserve the integrity of what is now. Or in the case of finishing a record, what is yesterday. You're caught in the now of between what you want to be doing now, which ultimately will be defining the next chapter, and what you have already done, and really all you're trying to do is get that thing birthed. It's fully made in the womb. You just got to get it out, and it's a lot of work. So I give myself the liberty to every single day to just start. But I also kind of give myself the rule that on day 2, I'm not allowed to go back to day 1, because I have to remind myself I'm giving myself the ability to start. So on day 2, I start again. And on day 3, I start again. On day 4, etc. So at the end of day 10, I had 10 starts for songs. And I'm talking about 10 days from turning in the masters of Brighter Wounds, which we turned in 2017. So I'm speaking to you in September 2020, 3 years ago, roughly to the week, we started the Tomorrow's volumes. So this has been long in formation, and it's still in formation. But basically we developed a pile of about 35 viable, valid ideas, all investigated to a degree. Some investigated really heavily with lots of tracking of various instruments and improvisations. Some barely, emerging from some MIDI data, in DP. The full gamut. And some developed really late in the game, and some developed like really early on, and then just kind of stayed put for a long time. And so the latest mixes we are working with right now, of the full, considering the full 3 volumes, some of them are, early 2019. It was like the last time, a couple of them were ever even touched. So this is very much a multi-volume album in development, and it's exciting to release it. It's kind of like an improvisation.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very liberating in a lot of ways to know that it's sort of this ongoing thing, and just to be able to finish it and be like, yeah, there's more to come, and we're gonna release this, and then
what it's like. It's like getting on stage and as an improviser and not knowing what's gonna happen. The commitment is made to get on stage. You start playing. You get through the first third of the song, and you have ideas about the next third and the third after that, but you really don't know how it's going to go. And it's kind of like, that's what we're doing as a band. Again, that sort of betrays the whole concept of the traditional concept of.
Were you guys in the room together? Were you sending files back and forth, your initial seeds, and then having them do, they're making their contributions, or how did that go?
Yes. So we were fortunate in that regard. We just before everything started to shut down, we had planned a really intense work week together to work on a film score and also on a bunch of stuff for the Tomorrow's volumes. And in particular, we were tracking drums and some traditional Chinese percussion and some more drums, so 2 drummers, and also doing some arranging work and just kind of like in the cockpit sort of the project, deciding on things together. And that was all scheduled, and I think it was the March 13th, I think, was our last day together, and Ian had planned to fly to London to start a tour with Moses Sumney, and Rafiq was planning on heading back to New York, but then shortly after that going overseas and doing some shows as well, and everything kind of just started to shut down, and everything started to change on a dime. And so Ian flew back to Dallas, where he lives. Ian flew back to Brooklyn and hunkered down. I got on a plane with my family. We had already planned for my wife and son to go to Indianapolis for family reasons. And I decided I didn't really want to get separated and have some weird domestic travel ban that like suddenly creep up and get separated. So I threw my, trash can Mac and my most important drives, and I think my U-87 and into a Pelican, and I got on a plane with them, and that's where I'm speaking to you now, from Indianapolis. I didn't return to LA, but we were fortunate that almost all of the sort of tracking that requires a lot of space and a lot of gear, we had just wrapped.
So what about now?
So now we mostly just have some guitars and vocals, and so I'm speaking to you from the room, like through the vocal chain I'm using to record my vocals here in Indianapolis, and I'm generally vocals, lyrics, melodic material, and just vocal aspects in general are among the last things to happen in a Son Lux track. And we do things pretty diametrically different than most, in that we don't really write songs and then cast them in the light of production. We sort of develop a sound world and work backwards to discover a song in which that, like a song that feels like it comes from that sound world. We're all like really very much sound geeks before, really maybe before anything else. We just have a fascination with the raw components of sound.
I think you've taken that as a launching pad, but you've certainly developed it into something that is the listener can latch onto and enjoy as a song.
Hopefully that is the response, which is that these are there's not an esoteric like web that you have to work through in order to hear the song. Ultimately, we've designed an estate, but we did it by starting with crafting a beautiful piece of furniture, and then we built the room around that furniture, and then put art on the walls, and then built the hallway, and then built the rest. We worked outward. The last thing we did is we kind of built the front of the house, really, that you see from the street. So as a casual listener, hopefully it is a beautiful house and you really think it's great, but hopefully also you step inside it and you sense, oh, there's something more to it. And you may actually never discover that beautiful piece of woodwork that kind of started it all up in the back bedroom or something, but you don't need to. That's how the house came to exist, but that's not the lens through which you have to see everything.
You've scored several films, Mean Dreams, Paper Towns, Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby. How is your approach different between making what's considered a more, your records are not mainstream, but a pop-focused record versus a film score?
Well, the stuff I've scored the most, I've done those films. Then I've worked on some other ones as well, and currently scoring a couple more. But the majority of the scoring I've done is actually for dance. My wife is a dancer and choreographer, and she got me into writing music for dance when we first met back when we were 19. And I've been writing music ever since, professionally, and it's been actually kind of the most consistent activity I've done in music. Is scoring movement, and often that's what it is. It's working with choreographers who either create movement to temp, or they choreograph in silence, and then I'm essentially scoring their body, scoring the movement, and just really fell in love with that process. And that was my segue into scoring picture, and then I cut my teeth scoring picture, doing ads mostly for years. And that was my full-time job. And then that's what made me really fast and facile with my equipment. And also just as it was just like one composer composing etude after another, for years, just writing, thousands of little pieces of music. But that's where I really started to learn about how to like support a narrative or tell a story in a small amount of time. And then gradually I started to score film, and but ultimately, in all those cases, the goal is to serve the picture, to serve the narrative, whether it's the movement or the cereal ad, or Jessica Chastain like falling apart emotionally. You're serving the goal of that picture. Making Son Lux records is more of a sacred space for me personally, because I'm at the whim. I'm at my own whim, right? And I'm not out there trying to serve another master. However, I will say that a good deal of Son Lux material has its origins in other projects, and especially early on, it was scores for dance that were where I could allow concepts to germinate, and provided me a sort of an excuse to get more experimental with my palette and like explore the potential of actually very humble tools, and develop an ethos around actually exploring very small amounts of sound and mining small amounts of material for its potential. And it's actually in that context that I developed an aesthetic around for the Son Lux project. In fact, the first Son Lux record, I didn't even know I was making an album. I was just doing what I wanted to when I had time to do it. And then at some point I realized, I think I'm making a record. And then, rest is history. But so Son Lux is indebted to scoring, but it's also free from it. And yeah, and I'm not really sure if there's a clear delineation, other than the end goal being, that when I'm making Son Lux records, I'm following my own whims, and in the case of the band, our own whims. Nowadays with Son Lux, everything is mutually vetted, so we don't really go off into our own worlds without, and we don't return without getting the blessing of all involved.
It's nice to have that collaboration and that sort of feedback, which is different from you scoring by yourself. So that's probably another benefit, and I imagine a welcome one if
right.
you have both.
Yeah, that's right. And now, and the reason why I welcomed Rafiq and Ian into the project and altered the very identity of Son Lux from being a solo project to being a band is that I recognized the profound, basically in the face of their beautiful talents and their enormous potential, I recognized my own limitations and very selfishly realized that these guys could help me be more the musician I want to be. I can glean things from them that I'm not going to be able. I can accomplish things creatively that I'm not going to be, that are in my heart to accomplish, but I'm not going to be able to do on my own. I truly, say without reservation that I was thinking very selfishly when I asked them to join, knowing that I would certainly gain more than I would give up.
That's great insight on your part. So, when you hear the earlier records that you made, what do you hear now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's funny, we were just on a text thread answering like another interviewer's questions, and one of the questions was like, if no one has ever heard Son Lux before, each of you tell me like the one song you'd want them to start with, right? And it's an interesting question, but for a number of reasons. But we were just thinking back through the entire discography, right? And so I was like actually thinking about some of that earlier stuff, what stuff I'm like most proud of, and what stuff I like. Is there anything that kind of makes me kind of cringe or whatever? And yeah, I can definitely say I'm while I know that I've evolved and I've matured, and I'm actually really proud of the entire discography. I hear, I still hear things in the very earliest records that I've never heard anywhere else on any other records. I've also heard what I think is maybe my influence on other artists in the early records that I'm hearing now in music that, 10 years ago I was doing on that first record or something, And I'm not sure there's a direct influence there, but I do hear, I hear things now that I'm like, yeah, those are the kinds of sounds I was going for back then, I recognize that it sounds arrogant to say, but it is part of what makes me proud of those records, which is that I don't feel like they sound dated, and I feel like they sound in some ways like I can hear their relevance in what is in the current landscape of music.
Yeah.
But I mostly I hear the limitation of my vocal instrument. I still hear a lot of wild creativity in the programming and a sort of like dexterous investigation of sound, and it's also challenging to me, to like my 2020 self, when I hear my 2006 self, like on my first record, which was 2008, but I was making it as early as late 2004. I hear ideas where I'm like, damn, that is a really creative idea. Like it's like really subtle stuff or whatever, but I'll kind of remember, oh yeah, that's right, I did do that. Like that was a pain in the ass to do. It took me like hours and hours, and it's like comprises a total of like 3 seconds on this one track, but man, it's a cool idea. It's very creative. Am I still that patient with my process? Am I still willing to experiment in that way? And so I still hear some really great stuff. But I do hear probably most, most of the development in my voice, in the way that I've learned how to use my voice. And I think the biggest, I took a leap once I started touring, and I have Ian and Rafiq to thank for that too. Just like being the band that I needed to finally take my music to the stage in a serious way. The project officially began in March of 2008 with the release of At War with Walls and Mazes, but I didn't go on the road until January of 2014 with these guys. So for 7 years, I was, just, singing into a microphone quietly, never really challenging myself because I didn't really know how to. And suddenly I'm on stage in front of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people earlier on, and already right out of the gate realizing that my voice was evolving on stage in response to that environment. And then I've learned how to kind of do some of the things that I've learned how to do on stage. I've slowly started to allow to influence my approach in the studio.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at tapeop.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time.